Welcome to the Energeia podcast, everyone. Dr. G here, and today I am joined by Junça Silva and Rita Rueff-Lopes. Anna is a professor in the Department of Human Resources and Organizational Behavior at the ISCTE Business School at the University Institute of Lisbon in Portugal. Her main research interests are well-being, daily micro-events at work, mindfulness, and positive organizational behavior. Anna has published extensively in academic journals such as Personality and Individual Differences, the Journal of Happiness Studies, and the European Journal of Work and Organizational Psychology, among others, and has presented her empirical work at various fora such as the European Congress on Work and Organizational Psychology and the International Seminar on Positive Organizational Health. Rita is an organizational behavior researcher and coordinator of the master thesis track at the Asada Business School in Barcelona. She is a member of the editorial board at the International Journal of Social Psychology and conducts research on the impact of daily events on emotional states, motivation, and health and well-being at the University of Barcelona. Rita also works as an associate researcher, analyst, and consultant on non-governmental organizations for SIGWatch, and her research has been published in academic outlets such as the European Journal of Work and Organizational Psychology, the Journal of Happiness Studies, and Personality and Individual Differences, among other outlets as well. So Anna, Rita, obrigado, gracias, and thank you so much for making the time to join me on the Energeia podcast today.
Thank you, Garrett. It's our pleasure.
Thank you.
So great to have you here. And so today we're going to discuss our two broad topic areas, namely mindfulness and emotional contagion. And we're going to address these two concepts by covering three papers that you collectively co-authored. And the first paper that we're going to turn to is the one that initially drew my attention to your work. And a shout out to your co-author, Leticia Mosteo, for helping make this connection between us. The paper is entitled The Role of Mindfulness on the Relationship Between Daily Micro-Events and Daily Gratitude. And it was published earlier this year in the journal Personality and Individual Differences. And so as someone who tries to intentionally cultivate mindfulness in my own life and who extols the virtues of mindfulness to my clients in my own private practice, I just thought this paper was super interesting. It was absolutely outstanding in many areas, not just in terms of its theoretical foundations and its theoretical contributions, but its methodological design, its result in empirical findings, but most importantly, just the implications of these findings for everyday people in everyday life. Like for me, this wasn't just research for the sake of research. This was research that produced real substantive insights that I think anyone concerned with their own self-development and their own aspiration toward emotional stability and betterment would really benefit from reading. So, first and foremost, just thank you and congratulations on producing a paper that should, and one hope does, have real impact in the world. But before we get into the findings of that paper, I wonder if either or both of you might start us off today by giving us a working, operational definition of mindfulness itself. Sometimes I worry that this term has become too big and too open-ended to be meaningful or relatable for some people. So would you set the scene by telling our listeners what mindfulness is in your view, and what might set it apart from, related, sometimes conflated terms like, say, self-awareness or introspection?
Okay, maybe I can start to give you some ideas about what mindfulness can be for us and for the practice of mindfulness at work. First, I think it is important to differentiate the idea between meditative mindfulness and socio-cognitive mindfulness, because even though they are related somehow, there are differences, and the papers that we have published about mindfulness are based on the socio-cognitive traditional of mindfulness and not the meditative mindfulness per se, because the meditative mindfulness, it is an approach that comes from the Buddhist tradition and is more related to the practice of mindfulness that triggers the calmness, that may relax yourself, may improve your contact with your body, with your sensations, feelings, and as such it is very good to improve your positive emotions, that Rita will talk later about emotional contagion. But the socio-cognitive mindfulness is different because it is more related with the focus that you can be and pay attention to what is going on around you, to what surrounds. And at the same time, it is also related to the way in which you can not only be attentive and aware of what happens, but makes you proactive regarding your working context, in which you try to find novelty, you try to produce novelty, and as such it creates an interactive effect between the social part and the social context and the cognitive way and patterns of thinking, reacting, behaving. That is why it is called socio-cognitive mindfulness. I don't know if Rita wants to give some idea about.
Yeah, I think another interesting characteristic about mindfulness is that when you are in this mode of paying attention to what happens within you and outside you, you have to be open, and accepting this experience. This involves obviously approaching these experiences with curiosity, with detachment, with non-reactivity. And this does not mean that you are being passive, to what happens in the world, but rather that you are like actively inviting the different experiences that you are living, always with this intention of learning and improving yourself. On the other hand, you were asking us about self-awareness and how mindfulness can be distinct from self-awareness. So I think self-awareness is more related to your ability, like to recognize and understand your own emotions, your thoughts, your behaviors. It involves, for example, being conscious about your strengths, about your goals, and how they relate, to the world around you. So I think while the two concepts are related, they are not the same thing, because mindfulness is like an exercise that can help you become more self-aware, but it's not self-awareness per se, because self-awareness also involves introspection, reflection, and this may not be directly related to present moment experiences.
Okay, so you think, just building off that, you would sort of see like self-awareness being kind of like an umbrella construct under which you could have subsumed mindfulness, introspection, and other qualities.
Exactly. Yes. And yes,
and the self-awareness concept is more related to the meditative mindfulness, because when you cultivate yourself, when you meditate, when you engage in actions to reflect, to be more aware, it is a kind of, you need to contact with yourself, be aware about your sensations, your feelings, and so the self-awareness concept is more related to the meditative mindfulness, and not only, it is not the central dimension of the socio-cognitive mindfulness.
Okay, understood. And so bringing the term mindfulness specifically into the organizational context, I mean, mindfulness is very often spoken about in business circles, nowadays. It's become kind of a cottage industry within organizational behavior and the study of leadership, to the point where it's almost become, trendy in some sense. And I don't say that to be, as a pejorative in any way, because I think it's a very, very helpful and generative development. But it has become very popular and mainstreamed in some sense. And since you both work at business schools, business universities, as I do as well, I mean, what from a scholarly perspective do you think are the most important connections between the principles and practice of mindfulness and key business outcomes of interest, whatever those might be, such as leadership performance and effectiveness, motivating employees, things like that? And perhaps what are some of the best, most practicable mindfulness activities that busy professionals could practice within their daily routine, especially since you've set up this distinction between different variants of mindfulness? Because many people know about mindfulness meditation, and there are various guided apps like Headspace and Waking Up that support this type of practice. But are there other kinds of practices or protocols that busy professionals could take advantage of in order to develop mindfulness in their lives? So kind of a two-part question. What do you think are the most important connections between mindfulness and business practice? And what can busy professionals do to best take advantage of that connection in their own careers?
Yeah, so I can start talking about some of the previous research that establishes a connection between mindfulness practices and some desirable business outcomes, as you mentioned, Gareth. For example, by improving emotional regulation, which is essential for leadership, as you know, as it enables leaders to stay calm and composed in challenging situations and to communicate more effectively with their teams. There is also research that shows that mindfulness enhances decision making by reducing biases and increasing cognitive flexibility. It helps with better stress management, which can help people prevent burnout, increase their performance. Mindfulness was also shown to improve communication, including active listening and empathetic understanding, because people are fully present and attentive while they are connecting with others. And about mindfulness practices, before we go there, and I don't know if you want to add more results of mindfulness for business outcomes.
Yes, there are a lot. You can differentiate between the personal outcomes, and it includes, as Rita was saying, the emotional regulation practices. It also enhances well-being, happiness, flourishing. It decreases the distress levels, the occupational distress levels. But there are also other organizational outcomes that matters for managers and for organizations, and that are related to the performance rates, and that may include task performance, innovation, creativity, decision making, as Rita was saying. But one thing that I think it is important to emphasize is that the mindfulness practices are not related to the meditative practices. Instead, there must be an organizational culture that should empower employees. Leaders should empower employees in order for them to think outside the box, because the socio-cognitive mindfulness is a lot of thinking and looking for novelty and being curious. And when you work in an organization that does not leave you to create, or does not leave you to think outside the box and be innovative and giving new ideas, then you cannot be mindful, and somehow you will be with your curiosity cut somehow. And there is another thing that is important, because when we think about mindfulness practices, the key or the key dimensions are related to the non-judgmental and the self-acceptance attitude, even when bad things or unexpected things occur. And this is much related to the last paper that we published this year. And when daily hassles occur, and there are different types of daily hassles that you have to experience when you work, that may be related to your managerial practices, with your leadership or co-workers' behaviors, and you have to face it. And if you have a mindful attitude, you won't ruminate about the bad things, but you can get coping strategies or emotional regulation strategies in order to overcome it in an effective way. So the key concept about mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness at work relies on the way through which you accept the things as they are occurring to you, and do not ruminate or think about how the things might go on if you cannot change it, because they have happened to them. For example, if something bad or unexpected happens to you, for example, you are applying to a job and you receive a non-answer, you cannot do something to repair what happened, or you should not go home and eat a cup of ice cream and then you ruminate about the bad things that have happened and also about the ice cream that you have eat. But you should try to understand what did you did wrong and what can you do in order to improve in the future. So you accept that things did not go as you expected, but you try to improve your performance in the long run. So it is the best or the crucial concepts about work-related mindfulness. Rita, do you want to add something?
I agree.
Okay, great. Well, let's turn now to the paper then, because you talked about daily hassles and uplifts and so forth, and I think this touches on this this construct of micro events that you explore in the paper and that you've published on previously as well. So, what are micro events? And in the paper, what did you find to be the role of mindfulness in influencing individuals' responses to those micro events in terms of their overall affect and their overall emotional state of mind?
So I can just introduce the theory, and then maybe you can go in more detail about the events of the paper. So basically, the micro events are based on the affective events theory, which was developed by Weiss and Zeno, I think in 1996. And basically, the authors proposed that every day we experience different hassles and uplifts. Okay, so basically, hassles are things that are happened and are evaluated as negative, whereas uplifts are those events that happen on a daily basis and that we evaluate as relevant and positive. So what they say is that these events, they influence our emotional states directly, and then it is through these emotions that different judgmental and affective driven behaviors occur. For example, job satisfaction, intention to quit, and so on. So in this specific paper, we were curious about exploring the role of mindfulness between daily events, daily micro events, and different outcomes that Anna will explain now.
Yes, as Rita was saying, the theory argues that when something occurs in the workplace, it makes you feel something. For example, if you arrive at work and someone does not say hello to you, you may feel bad about it, or you may feel dissatisfied. But what we were trying to understand was if mindfulness could shape the reactions that people have to daily events, both regarding the affective part and the gratitude part, because individuals are not equal, so they can have different reactions to the same event. And we thought that maybe individuals who are more mindful may have some different affective reactions or gratitude reactions when daily events occur, and when comparing them to mindlessness individuals, they can have different reactions as well. So we found that when a day is more positive, that is, when you experience more daily uplifts when compared to daily hustles, it is likely that affective experiences are more positive as well. However, this is different when we consider different levels of mindfulness, because those that scored higher on mindfulness, they have this relationship even more stronger, because they are more aware of what happens, they are more focused on the present and on the micro daily events that are happening to them, so they can notice them easily, and as such they are more able to savor it when compared to individuals that are not so mindfulness. So individuals who do not score so high on mindfulness do not benefit so much from the daily uplifts and the positive affective reactions, because they do not pay so much attention to what happens, so they cannot savor it so much as mindfulness individuals do.
Okay, great. And just turning to the idea of gratitude. I mean, many people hear about the importance of gratitude in daily life. I mean, it's just why practices like gratitude journaling have become so in vogue lately. But in the paper, what did you find to be the role of mindfulness in influencing individuals' responses to micro events in terms of their levels of daily gratitude specifically?
Well, the results were somehow different regarding the affective reactions, because when we analyze the relationship between daily micro events and mindfulness regarding affective reactions, mindfulness individuals get more benefits regarding the affective part. But when we analyzed the other way around, the relationship between daily micro events and daily gratitude, that is a more cognitive pattern of reactions to daily micro events, the results were different, because even though mindfulness individuals appear to demonstrate higher levels of gratitude in general, and regardless of the events that have happened to them, those who scored lower on mindfulness appeared to benefit most from having a positive day to feel grateful. So, less mindful individuals scored higher on gratitude when the day was more positive, and those who scored higher on mindfulness did not see significant differences in their gratitude levels, because they scored always higher on the gratitude. What we think is that those individuals who are less mindful appear to be more sensitive or more vulnerable to what happens to them to feel grateful. That is, they need more the external stimulus, the daily micro events, to be grateful to what happens to them, whereas mindful individuals do not need such external stimulus to be grateful to the life as a whole.
Okay, and Rita, anything that you want to add to that?
No, I totally agree with what Anna said. And actually, it was a surprising result for us, and we had to discuss it a lot. But in the end, I think it ended making sense, like that when you are mindful, is like you are not so permeable, to what happens outside you, and you need like this kick from the outside world to have like positive effect or negative effect from the events, but rather like you achieve like a state where you can find your balance, without needing to have this source this this source of events to feed you. Yes.
Okay. Okay, and at the risk of sounding like reviewer number 3 here, I really am trying to just play devil's advocate rather than be reviewer number 3 or whatever. But regarding the chain of causality that you established in your results, could any of it be like interpreted in reverse order? So, for example, could having high positive affect or high daily gratitude influence someone's propensity to practice mindfulness or to have a mindful mindset, let's say? Or say if you have a regular gratitude journaling practice or some other form of gratitude practice, could that be a higher predictor of your engagement in a regular mindfulness practice?
Yes, I think so. Yes, but I think like one of the strengths of this paper, like to support our findings, was the longitudinal design first, okay, which can so we can robustly affirm that we have a causality here, and it's not just like a spurious correlation as you often find in cross-sectional designs. But obviously, I think that if you were to test the other relation that you mentioned now, I think you would probably find some interesting results as well.
Okay, well, you're going to have to credit me on a co-authorship if that ever pops up. No, I'm joking. Okay. Let's turn now, and again, what a fascinating paper, and just one that I just found, again, to have so many just tremendous practical implications. But let's turn now to the second of the 2 topic areas we're going to discuss today, which is emotional contagion. I'm personally a massive fan of this construct, as I know you both are, since you've published so extensively in the space. This construct was central to my own dissertation research in graduate school, and I find it's a concept that resonates deeply with lay people, especially when it comes to the workplace. But before we get into the thrust of the papers we're going to explore, for our listeners who perhaps aren't familiar with this term, again, could you just set us up with a working operational definition of what emotional contagion is, how it influences everyday human social interaction, and particularly everyday human social interaction in the workplace?
Sure, and actually not only human interaction. Research has shown that emotional contagion is transversal to a lot of species, including primates, gray parrots, and even butterflies. So I think it's quite an interesting phenomenon that different species experience. And basically, emotional contagion is the tendency that we have to mimic, let's say, through the firing of the mirror neurons when we are interacting with another person. We involuntarily mimic their outward expressions, non-verbal expressions that can be, for example, facial expressions, the tone of voice, the posture, okay? So, for example, when someone is talking to you and frowning their face, you involuntarily mimic this expression, this angry expression, because of the firing of the mirror neurons. And then through a process of efferent feedback, which is basically the information that your muscles send to your brain or to your nervous central system, you end up feeling the same way, even though you don't have like a palpable reason to experience the same emotion. So, and this can occur either for positive or for negative emotions, of course. And there is a lot of research in different fields about emotional contagion. For example, about the contagion of the physical postures. We mimic the postures of other people within 21 milliseconds of interacting with another person. So yes, it is a very important aspect of our everyday life, although I think most of us are not aware of it. And we should, because, for example, there is also research that supports that when we mimic another person, we will have more influence over that person. There was also some very interesting research from an Israeli professor who did on laboratory an experiment where she put an Israeli person and a person from Palestine, and they were engaging in a dialogue. And one of them had already talked to the researcher and was instructed to mimic the postures of the other person. And when this happened, they reached an agreement faster that when mimicry was not involved. So yes, both the mimicry and the afferent feedback of emotional contagion are really, really relevant for different aspects of our everyday lives.
Okay, great. All right, well, let's now turn to the second paper entitled A Markov Chain Analysis of Emotional Exchange in Voice-to-Voice Communication, Testing for the Mimicry Hypothesis of Emotional Contagion, published in the journal Human Communication Research. Quite a mouthful of a title, but another incredibly interesting paper. And you concluded the paper by observing that, quote, we found that the tendency was not to copy what the other was saying, but rather how he or she said it, end quote. So could you comment on what you found in this research with respect to the occurrence and possible causes of auditory mimicry in voice-to-voice communication, and also how those findings expanded upon the existing extant research that was already there on emotional contagion?
Yes, sure. So what we found while conducting our literature review was that there was a lot of research already done in terms of emotional contagion for the facial expressions, both supporting the tendency to involuntarily mimic the facial expressions of others and to end up feeling the same way as others through this mimicry and the afferent feedback. So this was both stages were supported for the facial hypothesis. Then for the postural one, there was also an important body of research supporting both mimicry and afferent feedback. However, for the vocal hypothesis, we found that the studies were not so many, and the ones that existed, they either forced participants to repeat some sounds. For example, the long E in cheese, cheese. So people were forced to smile, and then they were testing the afferent feedback hypothesis, but there was no study that was able to support the tendency to mimic the emotional tone of the voice of the other people. So what we wanted to do was to find support for this hypothesis. So we went to a call center and we listened live to almost 1,000 phone calls between customers and clients. And basically what we did, we had a grid where we registered the balance of the emotions in each participant's turn at talk. So was it positive, was it neutral, or was it negative? And we did the sequence for each phone call. We were two researchers. So at the end of each phone call, we compared the grids, and whenever there was like discordance or something was not clear, we simply discarded that conversation. So we ended up with almost 1,000 conversations, as I told you, and we wanted to test different hypotheses, being one of the most important, that people had the tendency, and this was supported statistically, to mimic the emotional tone of the other person. So with the Markov chain, we were able to support this hypothesis that mimicry indeed happens, and other hypotheses that we posed as well. For example, that women were more susceptible for emotional contagion than men. And this has several reasons. For example, from an evolutionary perspective, women have to be more tuned to emotions to protect their children, also to understand their children's needs, other adult needs or goals in order to protect their descendants, etc. We also found that men, as the senders of the emotional contagion, they were stronger in send negative emotions than positive ones. You also have physiologically, this is due to the testosterone levels, okay, that are related with more negative expressions than positive. Another interesting result that we were not testing, but we found, was that negative emotions were stronger as the end of the week approach. And this was contrary to all previous research, which that found that as the weekend approach, people tend to feel more positive because they have something to look forward to. However, we found the opposite. We found that from Wednesday onwards, negative emotions became stronger and stronger and stronger. And what we propose is that there is a like a ripple effect of negative emotions. They accumulate, day by day. And because you don't have the opportunity, especially in call centers, to recover from one phone call to another, so it's like you have all the remains of the negative experiences within you, and you end the week in total emotional exhaustion. That's what we found.
Okay, I just want to say, because my next question was actually going to be about some of those moderating variables and the influence of them, because I found that fascinating. I mean, it actually, I'm just wondering, because I've got my own sort of take on, actually just reading some of those findings actually prompted me to think maybe I need to be more self-aware as a male about how my emotions are coming off, like particularly if I'm projecting negative emotionality, even unwittingly and unintentionally, and it's and especially to women, if it's more likely to rub off on them. But also the days of the week variable, I found those findings fascinating as well. So would either of you do you have any sort of thoughts about what the practical implications might be for those moderating influences of gender and days of the week when we're talking about the workplace specifically?
Yes, absolutely. I think about these moderators, but particularly about gender, well, I think information is key, and that people are sensibilized in some way. First, that emotional contagion exists, that your expressions, the way how you express emotions, they really have an impact on others, even if that is not your intention. I don't believe that when a customer was angry because of a situation, like his intention was to make the employee angry or fearful or whatever. But if we as humans are aware of this and we are more polite and considerate towards others, this impact will obviously be less. On another note, I think this end of the week impact of negative emotions, well, I think this is something that call centers particularly, they need to work on a daily basis. Not on a daily basis, but on a moment to moment basis. Like call center workers, they need to have the autonomy to take a break whenever they need. And this is a work context where workers have like a 10 minutes break every 3 hours, at least in the country where this research was conducted. They don't have any control about when they take this break, whereas they are exposed to so many situations of stress, negativity. They really need to have the autonomy to stop, even if it's for 2 minutes, to rest, to recover, and then come back. So I think companies should be aware of this impact on employees and reconsider this working model, which is so rapid and intense and even a bit cruel, to workers. It forgets somehow that workers are human and treat them as machines. I was reading a study the other day about call centers in Brazil, and there is not a legislation that regulates how many hours workers have to be on their phone. So some of them even wear diapers, like the ones for babies, because they weren't able to stop and go to the toilet whenever they needed.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. And I mean, I thought I'd heard it all about call centers, but that one actually completely blows my mind. And dare I say it, if ever there was a way, I mean, just to bridge the two broad concept areas that we're speaking about today, if ever there was a need to create a more mindfulness-oriented workplace, right?
Exactly.
You know, like, I mean, do you think, like, in practical terms, that if call center, I mean, not call centers specifically, you know, not solely call centers, but maybe just in this specific case, do you think, you know, the call center model could kind of benefit from a mindfulness oriented overhaul?
Absolutely. But I think this has to be a top-down implementation. You understand? It has
Sure.
to come, from the ones who are responsible for decision making. I think first they need to be aware themselves of the violence that occurs moment to moment to their employees, from the customers. I don't know. There is a paper. I don't know if you know. There is this author called Grandy. Her surname is Grandy. I think I don't remember her first name, but she did a very nice research about customers' rage. And this, I think, it explains so well. It's not only some mistreatment or being a bit unpolite. Is rage is verbal violence. So obviously, mindfulness would be very important. It has to come from a top down direction, so employees have the time and have the space to deal with every situation that comes across their working day. But also obviously to customers. But how can you educate your customers, right?
Yes.
Sure.
Indeed, I think mindfulness could help at a micro level because they could help employees to regulate their emotions in an effective way. But as Rita was saying, it has to come from the upper side of the organization, from the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of practices, organizational practices that are wrong and that do not respect at all the human rights in call centers.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I dare say the act of asking employees to wear diapers or putting them in a position to have to wear diapers, that seems frankly very at odds with the idea of a mindfulness-oriented workplace to me. Maybe that's just me, but yeah, that, the idea of it going that far seems diametrically opposed to the nature or the notion, I should say, of a mindfulness-oriented workplace.
Totally. So I think we honestly have a long way to go.
Yeah, no, there's work ahead of us, that's for sure. But so staying with this topic of emotional contagion, but moving on to the third and final paper of our discussion today, entitled "Forecasting the Influence of Customer-Related Micro Events on Employees' Emotional, Attitudinal, and Physiological Responses." This was published in the European Journal of Work and Organizational Psychology. This was also conducted in a call center.
Mm-hmm.
Something that, by the way, it's very salient for me since I once worked in a call center, as you were telling me you did as well, Rita, before we started the podcast. I mean, this was half a lifetime ago for me now, but I think call centers are a very representative and instructive instance of emotional labors, since call center workers, you mentioned that, it's often the customers don't do it intentionally. It's not like they're setting out to hurt people's feelings or anything like that. But call center workers often have to take so much grief and cop so much flack from callers while they're trying to maintain a sense of emotional steadiness and composure. So to take this back to the concept of micro events, what kinds of call center specific micro events did you evaluate in this particular study, and what were the major determinants of workers' responses to these events?
Sure. So this paper, I think it was like the second chapter of the first one. So in the first one of emotional contagion, first we wanted to support that mimicry and deferent feedback indeed occurred in call centers. Then we wanted to know, okay, so if emotional contagion occurs, how can this moderate the impact of affective events on their emotional experience, and then on other outcomes. Particularly, we were focused on turnover intentions and on cardiovascular efficiency. So basically, what we have done, we asked call center workers to write a diary every day where they would register the most relevant positive and negative events with customers they experienced that day, and to rate their emotional reactions. So what emotions arose from these events and the intensity of these emotions. So as I can try to share my screen and show you the main, because we found 13 events that were the most relevant. So on the positive side of the positive events experience with customers, the more important events were gratitude. So when employees were thanked or they received recognition for the service provided. Then were the compliments when they were praised by consumers. Then we had politeness, which involves the well-accepted conduct like saying please and thank you. So when a consumer was polite, we had friendliness, familiarity, and laughing together. So this was also considered as a positive event. On the negative side, we had complaints, consumers that did not accept explanations or justifications, consumers that disconnected the call abruptly. So while the employee was still doing his or her job and explaining, the consumer simply had enough and disconnected the call. Consumers that asked to speak with the supervisor because they believed the employee was not able to solve the situation. Aggressive behavior or tone of voice, offending behavior, and sarcasm. Okay, so these were the categories that we found in our study. About the relationship with different emotions. So, for example, the category of aggressive behavior, it related to all the negative emotions that we were studying. So, angry, feeling bad, unpleasant, sad, afraid, and negative. Whereas category of does not accepting explanations and sarcasm also led to experience almost all negative emotions. And then we created a group category called negative behaviors directed towards the company that included asking to speak with the supervisor, complaining, and disconnecting the calls abruptly. And these were also connected to almost all the negative emotions except unpleasantness. About the positive events, we analyze this relationship between the events and the emotions using a method that is called artificial neural networks. And before it establishes a direct relationship between the events and the emotions, it groups the events. And what we found was that all the positive emotions were grouped in one single category that included politeness and laughing together, which we called positive behaviors. And this led to feeling pleasant and contented. So these were the main relations that we found.
What I found most impressive about this study was just how methodologically and analytically thorough it was, just with respect to employing, and triangulating multiple sources of data. Most interestingly for me, the physiological data, and then, converting them all into this, these coherent, mutually supportive findings. But for the physiological measures specifically, what physiological measures did you employ, and how did these contribute to building the overall empirical case that you made in the research?
So basically, what the physiological measures we employed were the systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, and the heart rate. And this was to have a composite variable that is called the pulse product, which was created by an author called Addis in 1922, because he found that when you use the systolic and the diastolic blood pressure alone, they originate contradictory results. So alone, they are not very reliable measures about your energy expenditure, which is very interesting to use in work context. So we came up with this measure, which is basically the difference between the systolic and the diastolic measures divided by the No, multiplied by the heart rate and divided by 100. And so the higher the value, the higher your cardiovascular efficiency, basically. And what we wanted to check was if these emotional experiences that were produced by the affective events clients would influence on your cardiovascular efficiency. And we found that yes, definitely, yes, they have an important influence, but not only on our cardiovascular efficiency, as well as in your intention to quit. Okay, your intention to quit the organization. And there were two emotions that stood out in the relationship with these two dependent variables. In your physiological measure, the emotion that most predicted or more influenced your cardiovascular efficiency was fear. And this is, for us, was very interesting, and it's very related to this fight or flight reaction. When you experience fear, right, you want to simply get out of that situation, but obviously your heart rate increases, your skin conductance, your temperature, well, or all your bodily functions, they are changed by fear. And this is what our results told us, that fear was always generated from these interactions where customers were aggressive. Okay, so they generated fear on employees, and therefore the cardiovascular efficiency suffered. Regarding the turnover intention, this was mostly influenced by anger. Okay, so employees felt anger towards the customer, towards the work, well, basically towards all the scenario where they were involved, and this led to intentions to quit the organization.
It's fascinating, like so many fascinating results in this study. And just finally, I mean, in the conclusion of the article, you state, quote, "The impact of customer behavior on workers does not end when they hang up the phone."
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if both of you might comment on what this quote in the conclusion suggests about the scope of emotional contagion, in so much as it supports the notion that the contagion doesn't actually have to be an in-person, range of the moment, short-term effect between people in close proximity that can actually occur more distantly over a longer period of time. I think some people, even people that are familiar with the emotional contagion literature, they have this sense that, you know, a negative emotion will rub off on someone, but it's a relatively transitory effect and a relatively transient effect, and it comes and it passes, but it doesn't really stick around. But this conclusion seems to suggest otherwise. So I wonder if either or both of you might comment on what this says about, again, the scope of emotional contagion.
Yes, definitely. It's not a momentary effect. What we found in this study and on the previous one as well was that when you were infused with negative effect on one phone call, your baseline effect for the following phone call was more negative than in the previous one. So it's like, you know, this ripple effect that extends from one interaction to the other. It's not something that is isolated in one interaction, you know, because we are not robots. So if we have like a baseline emotional experience, like a neutral one in the beginning of the day, if you start with a negative call, we found that the probability of you starting a negative emotional interaction with the client was significantly higher. Yeah. And this was not only from one call to another, but as we were discussing, also from one day to another. You know, like when we found that in the end of the week, the cumulative effect of negative emotional exchanges led to experience significantly more negative emotions on Fridays than on Mondays. So it's not something that is isolated. It is actually a phenomenon that sticks with you and has a ripple effect from moment to moment, from day to day. And unfortunately, if you are not aware of it, well, it can have severe consequences.
What do you think some of the most pertinent consequences could be for the workplace specifically?
Of course, there are certainly several consequences for the workplace, both for the micro level and at the individual level, and for the organizational level.
Now, obviously, for the individual level, when you experience so many negative emotions on a daily basis, it can lead to burnout, it can lead to emotional exhaustion on the interaction with others, with other colleagues, with other clients. It can lead to strained relationships between individuals, as these emotions can be transferred from one person to another, and this can create obviously a lot of tension and conflict for the self and for the others. It can also lead to decreased productivity, because when negative emotions are contagion within a group, it can lead to decreased productivity, to decreased success, a less cohesive and effective team. So actually emotional contagion, and especially negative emotional contagion, has a very important impact in different areas of an organization.
Well, Rita and Anna, you've both been so incredibly generous with your time today. So thank you so much for doing this. I also just want to give again a quick shout out to Leticia Mosteo, your colleague and co-author, who helped make the introduction and set up this podcast. But to you both, I personally have a tremendous amount of interest in and admiration for the research you've been involved in. And as I said earlier, it's not just research for its own sake. It's research with real practical, tangible, and appreciable implications for the real world. And I think these two areas of mindfulness, particularly as it relates to micro events, just the daily ups and downs of life, and emotional contagion, are just so important and so germane to modern business practice, that I hope more people have the opportunity to read your research and integrate the implications of your findings into their lives, their careers, and their organizations. Because, as you mentioned earlier, it's a tall order. There's a long way to go with some of this stuff, but I think it's an eminently worthwhile project. So I hope people out there do take on board the implications of your findings and help integrate them into making better organizations and better workplaces. So again, thank you so much. And my sincere gratitude to you both for taking the time to be with me today.
No, thank you, Garrett. Thank you for the invitation. We are great fans of your podcast, and it was really, really a great honor to be part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, truly, the honor is all mine, and hopefully we can have you back sometime. But please just keep doing what you're doing, and I love your work. So take care, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
Sure. Thank you so much, Garrett. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
And it got me thinking.